Single dad buys diapers. With last dollar, the lonely CEO behind him says, "I'll take 'em all. You're short by 87 cents. The cashier's voice broke through the hum of the supermarket like a glass of cold water to the face. Jack Carter froze. His hand hovered over the counter, holding out the last of his change, 3 quarters, a nickel, and a few pennies worn down by time and desperation. Behind him, his daughter Emma started to cry. It was a tired, hungry cry, the kind that echoed in silence and made everyone around uncomfortable. She was strapped into a faded plastic shopping cart, her tiny legs kicking the air, cheeks flushed with heat and the sticky remnants of a half-eaten cracker. Jack forced a thin, apologetic smile. "Can you take the wipes off?" "You didn't buy wipes," the cashier replied, still focused on the screen. "Oh." Jack lowered his eyes. Of course he hadn't. There was only one item on the conveyor belt, a single pack of off-brand diapers. Size 3. That was all he had come for, all he could afford, or thought he could. He dug into his other pocket, pulling out 2 more dimes and a bent penny. He counted again, then again. Still short. Behind him, someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard, "Shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them." Jack didn't turn around. He crouched beside the cart, pretending to adjust Emma's blanket while his hands searched his coat pockets for something, anything. His fingers touched nothing but old receipts and lint. And finally, his fingertips brushed a quarter. He pulled it out with cautious hope, but as he did, another penny slipped through his grasp and clinked onto the floor. It rolled in a slow arc beneath the cart. Jack lowered himself to the floor. It was cold. His knees ached. He reached for the penny, and Emma whimpered above him, reaching down toward his head with her chubby fingers. He smiled up at her. "Almost, baby. Almost." Someone in line let out a loud sigh. Another shifted noisily. The tension behind him thickened. Jack stood again, holding the rescued penny like it was made of gold. He placed it on the counter. Every cent counted. The cashier raised an eyebrow. "Still 87 short." Jack's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't want to say it, but he would. He was about to tell them to put the diapers back. Then a calm, clear voice from behind. "I'll take them all." Jack turned. The woman behind him stood with quiet composure. She looked to be in her early 30s, tall, with soft blonde curls cascading over one shoulder. She wore a cream-colored coat and held a small shopping basket, baby food, a stuffed giraffe, a bottle of organic shampoo. She stepped forward and placed her basket on the belt. "I'll cover his items," she told the cashier gently, then looked at Jack. "Please." Jack blinked. His mouth opened again, but no words came. He looked at Emma, whose cries had turned into gentle hiccups. She stared at the woman, wide-eyed. The woman smiled at her, then turned back to the cashier. "And add a pack of wipes," she said, "and a few of those fruit pouches." The cashier looked from her to Jack, then began scanning again. Jack's chest felt tight, not from stress this time, but from the strange mix of gratitude and shame he didn't know how to carry. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. He began. She lifted a hand, gently, not to silence him, but to stop him from saying something he might regret. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "She deserves to go home clean and full. That's all." Jack looked into her eyes. There was something in them, something tired but kind. Not pity, not superiority, just a quiet understanding. A look that said, "I've been there too." He swallowed, then nodded. No words, just the smallest gesture of respect. Behind them, the line had gone quiet. Maybe some still judged. Maybe some felt ashamed. But none of that mattered. Because something rare had happened. A stranger stepped in. Not out of guilt, not for attention, but because she saw someone worth helping. What Jack didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this woman, this kind, quiet stranger, had already crossed paths with him once before, and soon she would again. If you believe the world needs more moments like this, if you believe in compassion without conditions, tap that hype button. It helps us share these stories with more hearts just like yours. Jack stared at the receipt as the cashier handed it to the woman behind him. He did not move. His hand tightened around the shopping bag she had just paid for. Diapers, wipes, a few fruit pouches, even a small plush toy for Emma. He could feel the weight of each item, not just in the bag, but in his chest. He turned to her slowly. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that did not come from lack of sleep, but from years of quiet, grinding survival. He looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not a beggar," he said. It was not a protest. It was not anger. It was a wound. The words came out low and strained, edged with something raw. Evelyn Hart did not flinch. She looked at him, not with pity, not with condescension, but with calm and something deeper. Recognition. "I know," she said gently. "I never thought you were." Jack looked away for a second, trying to steady his breath. He was not used to this, whatever this was. Kindness made him nervous. It always came with strings. He had learned that the hard way. But then Evelyn spoke again, her voice softer than before. "When I was a baby," she said, "there were days I went without diapers too. I remember the cold, the smell. I remember the way people looked at my mother when she asked for help." She paused. "So, I am not helping out of pity. I just know the feeling." That stopped him. His eyes flicked back to hers, the hardness in them giving way to a flicker of surprise. For a moment he said nothing. Emma let out a small laugh behind him, distracted by the giraffe toy sticking out of the bag. Her tiny fingers reached for it, and Jack turned slightly to steady the cart. He looked back at Evelyn. The fight in him had softened, just a little. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not surrender, not defeat, just respect. "Thank you," he murmured. She smiled at him then. Not wide, not showy, just enough to say, "You are welcome." He turned the cart and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors opened with a quiet whoosh, letting in the cool air of early evening. Jack pushed Emma slowly toward the parking lot, still thinking about her, about this woman with gold hair and steady eyes who had not only helped him, but understood him. At the edge of the lot, he paused beside a row of clearance bins near the exit. He reached into the shopping bag and pulled out one item, the bright red snack pouch Evelyn had asked the cashier to add last minute. It was strawberry and banana flavored, probably organic, probably overpriced. Jack stared at it in his hand for a few seconds. Then, gently, he walked back inside and placed it carefully on the impulse shelf near the register. He kept the diapers, the wipes, the giraffe because Emma already loved it. But the snack? That was more than they needed. And Jack had a rule: take only what you cannot give back. Outside, he strapped Emma into the car seat of an old dented pickup truck that had seen better days. The interior smelled faintly of motor oil and worn leather. She was humming now, babbling nonsense sounds, the toy giraffe clutched tightly in her lap. Jack got behind the wheel and sat there for a long moment. He had not expected anyone to help him tonight. He certainly had not expected her. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Emma grinned at her own reflection, then waved the giraffe in the air like a trophy. Jack let out a breath he had been holding all day. He did not know her name, she had not offered it, and he had not asked. But her face stayed with him, calm, kind, familiar in a way he could not quite place. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, then started. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he whispered to himself, just loud enough for Emma not to hear, "I'm not a beggar." And somehow, tonight, for the first time in a long time, he believed it. The view from the 32nd floor of Heart Baby headquarters stretched across the skyline. Glass and steel shimmered in the morning sun, reflecting a city Evelyn Hart had helped shape. But her office was quiet. Too quiet. She stood at the window, fingers turning a small, worn silver locket. The chain was frayed, the metal dulled. She had held it this way 1,000 times, out of habit, out of pain. She opened the latch. Inside, etched in shaky letters, J. Carter. A knock broke the silence. "Come in," she said without turning. Margaret, her longtime assistant, entered with a stack of papers. "Board reports for Midtown," she said, then paused. "You're holding that locket again." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Do I always do that?" "Only when you're thinking about the fire." Evelyn let the quiet stretch before answering. "I dreamed about it again last night," she said, still staring at the city. "I was 7. The orphanage was falling apart. They said it was an accident. I never believed them. Most of the kids got out. I didn't." Margaret sat quietly, listening. "I was upstairs, smoke everywhere. I crawled under the bed, couldn't breathe. I thought it was over. Then, someone kicked the door in." She turned from the window, holding the locket between her fingers. "It was a boy, 10 maybe, dirty jacket. He threw it over me, picked me up and said, 'I got you. You're safe now.' Then he carried me out." Evelyn paused. "They never found him. No name, no file. Firefighters guessed he was a street kid. All I had was this," she held up the locket, "which must have come off his neck when he carried me." Margaret nodded. "You've been searching ever since." "Not openly, but in my heart. I think I never stopped." That afternoon, Evelyn visited Hope and Hands, a non-profit supported by Heart Baby. It offered supplies and support for single parents. She came often, quietly, no press. As she passed the distribution desk, she stopped. A man stood there, a toddler in his arm, signing a clipboard. Grease stained his jeans. His boots were worn, his posture strong, steady. The girl on his hip giggled and clapped. Evelyn's heart caught. The baby from the supermarket. The man turned. It was him. They locked eyes, familiarity passing between them. Evelyn stepped closer. "I didn't expect to see you again." Jack nodded. "Neither did I. But, thank you. Emma's doing better." "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, smiling. "We're just here for diapers. They said they restock Thursdays." "I know," she said. "I fund this place." Jack looked surprised. Then he nodded. She hesitated. "Do you still work on cars?" Jack tilted his head. "Yeah, side gigs when I can, mostly cash work." "We have vans at Heart Baby," she said, "always breaking down. If you're interested, I could set up a contract, flexible hours, fair pay." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I'm broke?" "No," she said softly. "Because you're capable and honest, and I think you deserve a break." He held her gaze, then shifted Emma to his other arm. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Jack turned and walked out. Evelyn remained where she was, her pulse louder than it should have been. She hadn't asked his full name. Not yet. But something about him, his voice, his presence, stayed with her like smoke. She looked down at the locket, still warm in her hand. "J. Carter," she whispered. And for the first time in years, she wondered if the boy from the fire had just come back. The garage behind Heart Baby's main warehouse was nothing fancy, just a wide, oil-stained space with flickering lights, battered tool chests, and delivery vans in various stages of decay. But to Jack Carter, it felt like purpose. For the first time in a long while, he had a routine. He arrived early each morning, Emma nestled in a second-hand baby carrier on his chest. She slept soundly against him as he worked, soothed by the rhythm of wrenches and ratchets. Jack did the best he could with limited parts. He tracked every bolt, every belt, every fix. He never padded his hours, never lied about repairs. When a part was still usable, he said so. People noticed. especially Evelyn. One Thursday, she walked into the garage unannounced. The scent of motor oil hit her instantly, but she smiled through it. Her heels clicked softly on the concrete as she approached the far end of the bay. Jack was crouched beside a van, sleeves rolled, grease on his arms. Emma sat nearby in the hollow of an old tire, giggling, waving a piece of brake line like a magic wand. "Is that safe?" Evelyn asked, smiling. Jack looked up, surprised. "No fluid, she's fine, just—" He paused, testing her lunar landing gear. Evelyn stepped closer. Emma was surrounded by makeshift controls, 2 small wheels up front like a cockpit and tubing for a pretend horn. "She said she wanted to go to the moon," Jack added. "This is her training module." Evelyn laughed, genuine and unguarded. Jack felt something stir. It had been a long time since he heard laughter like that, soft, honest, from someone who meant it. "Hazel Hewitt," she said, "happier now than ever before." "Happier simply to be wealthy," Evelyn said, looking at an... "I try," Jack answered. A week later, Evelyn returned. This time, there was no laughter. Jack was pacing outside the garage, Emma limp in his arms. Her cheeks were flushed, forehead damp. "She's burning up," he said, panicked. "Was going to take her to the clinic, but my truck won't start." Without hesitation, Evelyn unlocked her car. "Get in." Jack climbed in without argument. The ride was quiet, except for Emma's occasional whimpers. Evelyn drove fast but careful. Jack sat stiffly, hands clenched. At the clinic, Evelyn handled the paperwork. Jack never left Emma's side. "A simple fever," the doctor said. "Nothing serious, but enough to shake any parent." Outside, on a bench, they waited for the prescription. Jack cleared his throat. "Thank you." His voice was quiet, almost cracked. It was not a casual thank you. It came from somewhere deeper. Evelyn didn't smile this time. She only nodded. "You're welcome." Emma rested against Jack's chest, eyes already drifting closed. "You're a good father," Evelyn said softly. Jack looked down. "I'm trying. That's all it takes." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began visiting the garage more often. She always had a reason, new parts, updated delivery schedules, but she lingered longer than needed. Jack started saving Emma's best moments to share with her, how she danced to the hum of the air compressor, or her obsession with paper towels. And Evelyn found herself laughing more, smiling longer, coming back. Something was growing. Not romance. Not yet. But something warm. Something real. Jack, who once kept the world at arm's length, now listened for her footsteps. Evelyn, who had trusted no one but herself, began waiting for the moment he looked up and said, "Morning!" In that grease-scented space, among engines and giggles, between sick days and soft thank yous, a friendship began. Not because they were broken, but because, in each other's eyes, they finally felt seen. It started with a photo, a grainy snapshot taken on someone's phone, posted to social media with a caption that was more poison than praise. It showed Evelyn Hart, elegant, composed, perfectly dressed, kneeling beside a rusty pickup truck, holding a baby girl wrapped in a faded pink blanket. The moment had been innocent, private. A fleeting second outside the family center, when Jack was fumbling with the car seat straps, and Evelyn had scooped Emma into her arms with practiced ease. She had smiled down at the little girl. Emma had laughed. Someone had taken the shot. By morning, the image was everywhere. Billionaire CEO cradles poor man's baby. Is it real compassion or a PR stunt? Rich woman, poor baby. Is Evelyn Hart playing savior for the cameras? CEO uses struggling single dad to rebrand humanity into her company. The options were... Headlines screamed. Opinions poured in. Some praised her, most did not. Talk shows speculated. Internet trolls tore her apart. Even investors started asking questions. Evelyn read it all in silence. She sat at her desk in the high-rise office, scrolling through an endless feed of comments, her face unreadable. Her phone buzzed every 30 seconds, Margaret trying to get through, reporters asking for statements, crisis managers offering spin. She answered none of them. Instead, she closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, polished, successful, poised. But inside, she felt like the little girl in the orphanage again, invisible and alone. That afternoon, Jack was under the hood of a van when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the screen. A news alert. He opened the article. Then another. And another. The words hit like punches. Evelyn's name smeared across headlines. Emma's photo online for the world to see. He stood there, frozen. Fury boiled up in his chest, not because they used his image, but because they had turned her into a villain. Without thinking, he dropped the wrench, wiped his hands, and headed straight for the main building. The receptionist at Heart Baby hesitated when Jack stormed into the lobby. He did not have an appointment. He did not need one. "I need to see Evelyn," he said. "Now." His voice left no room for argument. 2 minutes later, the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Evelyn looked up as Jack walked in. She had not expected anyone. Least of all him. Her eyes were tired, makeup faintly smudged at the corners, like she had rubbed away a few tears and pretended she hadn't. Jack stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "You don't have to take this alone," he said without preamble. She blinked. "It's fine." "No, it's not," he snapped, then caught himself. "They are dragging your name through the mud, using me, using Emma." Evelyn turned her gaze away. "It will pass." Jack shook his head. "That doesn't mean you have to let it." Silence stretched between them. And then Evelyn exhaled, slow and shaky. "I'm not crying because of the headlines," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. Jack stepped closer. She continued, eyes locked on the floor. "I'm crying because, for once, someone spoke up for me. You did." He said nothing. Evelyn looked up. Her eyes shimmered. "When I was a kid," she said, "I used to dream that someone would stand between me and the world, just once. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to." Jack swallowed hard. "You just did that," she finished, her voice cracking. And just like that, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. Jack nodded slowly. "I didn't do anything special." "You showed up," she said. "That's more than most ever did." For a moment, they just stood there, two people who had grown used to carrying their own weight, finally realizing they did not have to. Not always. Outside the window, the city buzzed with noise and opinions, and the constant churn of scandal. But in that office, it was quiet, real, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Hart let herself feel safe. The envelope arrived in the morning mail, slipped between an overdue utility bill and a flyer for discount tires. Jack almost tossed it aside, but the logo in the top corner caught his eye. Heart Baby. He tore it open with a calloused thumb, brow furrowed. Inside was a formal letter, printed on thick cream paper. It was direct and professional, signed in blue ink. "We would like to offer you the position of Logistics Operations Manager, full-time, benefits included, start date flexible." Jack sat on the couch, the letter resting in his lap like something too heavy to lift again. He stared at it for a long time. Logistics Manager, not a mechanic, not a temp worker fixing vans between diaper runs. A manager, a leader. He looked across the room at Emma, curled up on the floor with her toy giraffe and a blanket that still smelled faintly of Evelyn's perfume. He wanted to say yes, but the old voices crept in. "You are not qualified. You are not that guy. They will find out who you really are. He folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. That evening he stayed late at the garage, turned off the lights, locked up, drove home slowly, windshield wipers clicking back and forth across light drizzle. The sky had turned an unforgiving gray. Rain fell in scattered sheets, soaking the cracked sidewalk and the faded welcome mat in front of his small apartment. He was feeding Emma when the knock came. Not loud, just steady. He opened the door and saw her standing there. Evelyn. Her blonde curls were damp from the rain, her coat clinging to her shoulders. In her arms was a thick, folded blanket, a deep navy blue, lined with soft white fleece. She held it out. "For Emma," she said. Jack stepped aside wordlessly and let her in. The apartment was modest, clean. A lamp in the corner glowed softly, casting a warm light across the room. Evelyn bent down and gently draped the blanket over Emma, who reached for it immediately and smiled. Jack stood by the kitchen counter, unsure what to say. "I got your letter," he said finally. "I figured you did. You didn't have to come." "I know," she said. He hesitated, then added, "I am not sure I can do that job." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked over, slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She reached for his hand. "Jack," she said quietly, "do not walk away from someone who believes in you." His throat tightened. "I've made mistakes," he said. "So have I. I dropped out of college, never finished a thing I started. You raised a child alone. You fix what's broken. You show up. That counts for more." Jack blinked hard, fighting the sting in his eyes. "I am not used to this," he said. "Someone seeing more than what's on the surface." "I see you," Evelyn said. She squeezed his hand, and something broke open inside him. He lowered his head and let the tears fall, silent, unshaken, as if they had been waiting for years. Evelyn stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, steady and firm. She did not let go. Neither did he. For the first time in a long time, Jack Carter let someone hold the weight with him. And when the rain finally stopped, and Evelyn turned to go, he said two words that changed everything. "I'm in." The city shimmered below like a sea of glass and light, but Evelyn Hart was not looking at it. She sat alone on the rooftop terrace of Hart Baby headquarters, the wind teasing loose strands of her curls. Her coat hung forgotten behind her chair. In her hand was a small silver locket, worn, scratched, dulled with time. She opened it gently. Inside, etched in faint, clumsy letters, J. Carter. She had carried it for over 20 years. The memory was no longer a blur. The fire, the smoke, the boy's voice. She had spent her life wondering if she would ever find him, if she would ever say, "Thank you." That night she sent Jack a message. "Can you meet me on the rooftop tomorrow morning? There's something I need to ask." His reply came quickly. "Sure, I'll be there." The next morning, Jack stepped onto the rooftop just after sunrise. A chill hung in the air. His jacket was zipped halfway, grease still smudged faintly on his sleeves. Evelyn was already there, arms loosely crossed. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke. "Jack, what's your full name?" He blinked. "Jack Carter." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket, holding it in her open palm. "Does this look familiar?" Jack stepped closer. The moment he saw it, his expression shifted. He picked it up carefully, opened it. "I haven't seen this in over 20 years, he murmured. "This was mine. My mom gave it to me when I was little." He looked up, confused. "Where did you get it?" Evelyn's voice was soft. "There was a fire at my orphanage. I was trapped upstairs. Couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." Jack's eyes widened. "I remember that fire," he said slowly. "I lived nearby, saw the smoke. I ran over. Someone said there was still a girl inside." He trailed off. "You..." Evelyn nodded, eyes shining. You kicked the door in. You were just a boy. You threw your jacket over me and said—" Jack whispered, "I got you. You're safe now." Her breath caught. "You were him." "I never knew who you were," Jack said, still stunned. "Just that you were scared, and I had to get you out. And this," Evelyn pointed to the locket, "was still in my hand when they carried me out." Jack reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded, yellowed scrap of paper. He handed it to her. She opened it, a rough evacuation list, scribbled at the bottom in a child's handwriting. "Blonde girl, room 14, saved." "I kept that ever since," Jack said. "I always wondered what happened to you." Evelyn couldn't speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. She stepped closer and gently leaned her head against his shoulder. Jack froze for a moment, then slowly took her hand in his. They stood there together, wrapped in silence, surrounded by wind and sky. Below them, the city kept moving. But up on that rooftop, time had paused. "You saved my life," Evelyn whispered. "And you gave mine back," Jack replied. She smiled faintly. "Maybe we belonged to each other all along, just didn't know how to find our way back." Jack didn't answer. He only held her hand tighter. And as the morning sun broke over the skyline, something lost long ago was finally found. 1 year later, the garage was gone, replaced by a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor of Heart Baby's operations wing. But Jack still showed up early every morning, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other, just in case. His new title, Director of Logistics and Community Outreach. But most people still just called him Jack. In the past year, life had shifted. He had gone from sleeping on a worn-out couch to helping build programs that changed lives. His proudest project? A workshop. At the back of Heart Baby's headquarters, where the loading docks once stood, now stood a space he had helped design. Second Chance, a skills program for single parents. Free mechanical training, childcare on site, hot meals, job placement help. All the things he had once needed, now offered freely to others. Evelyn had trusted him from day one. "You know what it should be," she told him. "Build it your way." So he did. Twice a week, Jack taught young moms and dads how to fix cars, hold a wrench, and believe in themselves. They came in uncertain. They left with oil-streaked hands and lifted chins. He saw himself in every one of them. That morning, Evelyn stood with Emma at the curb of her preschool. The little girl, now 2, was taller, chattier, and still inseparable from her stuffed giraffe. Jack approached just as Evelyn kissed Emma's forehead. "Ready?" he asked. Evelyn smiled and took his hand. "Always." They walked back to the car, no rush, no stress, just steady love. That afternoon, Evelyn stood behind a podium at Heart Baby's new community wing. A few press, a few staff, cameras clicked softly. "Today is more than the launch of a charity," she began. "It's a promise that no parent should feel alone and no child should go without." She turned slightly, gesturing toward Jack. "I'm proud to introduce the new CEO of the Second Chance Foundation," she said. "A man who knows what it means to fall and rise again. Jack Carter." Applause rose gently. Jack stepped forward. No tie, just a crisp shirt and quiet strength. He looked over the crowd, then began. "I used to think survival was enough," he said. "Just getting through the day. But someone showed me life is about more than that. It's about being seen, about having someone believe in you when you don't believe in yourself." He glanced at Evelyn. "She didn't save me, she stood beside me. That's what Second Chance is about, standing beside someone until they can stand on their own." The applause this time came with misty eyes. Later that evening, when the lights and speeches were over, Jack, Evelyn, and Emma sat together on a bench in the park. The sunset bathed the trees in gold. The breeze smelled like cut grass. Emma slept in Jack's arms, wrapped in the same navy moon blanket Evelyn had once brought them on a stormy night. Evelyn rested her head on Jack's shoulder, one hand on Emma's back, the other curled into his. They said nothing. They did not need to. This was not a fairy tale, not a perfect ending. It was something better. It was real. A father who almost gave up. A woman who never stopped searching. A little girl who brought them together. And a second chance that made them whole. If this story moved you, reminded you of the quiet strength in kindness and second chances, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true-to-the-heart tales that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen fades. Because somewhere out there, someone just like Jack, Evelyn, or little Emma is still waiting for hope, for love, for a moment that changes everything.
Poor twin girls fix a millionaire CEO's plane. When they say their father's name, he turns pale. Take a second to comment your location below. It's always amazing to see our global family. Enjoy the story. The old toolbox sat between them. On the kitchen floor, its worn leather case cracked with age but meticulously maintained. 9-year-old Emma Parker reached inside with oil-stained fingers, extracting a small screwdriver with the practiced ease of someone 3 times her age. 3/16 Phillips, she announced, handing it to her identical twin sister. Olivia nodded, her matching braids swinging in unison as she accepted the tool. Perfect. Hold the flashlight steady. Mrs. Jenkins' old toaster lay in pieces before them, its inner workings exposed like a patient on an operating table. The elderly neighbor had appeared at their door that morning, desperation in her eyes. I know it's not worth fixing, she had admitted to their grandmother, but it was Harold's wedding gift to me 40 years ago. In the small kitchen of their modest 2-bedroom apartment, the twins worked in concentrated silence, communicating with subtle glances and nods that only they understood. Their grandmother, Susan, watched from the doorway, a bittersweet smile playing on her weathered face. "You're both so much like your father," she whispered almost to herself. At the mention of their father, both girls looked up simultaneously. Captain James Parker had been gone for 5 years now, killed in Afghanistan when the girls were barely 4, old enough to remember his gentle hands guiding theirs over engine parts, young enough that his absence still felt like a fresh wound. "Daddy would have fixed it faster," Olivia said matter-of-factly. "But he would have been proud," Susan responded, crossing the room to stroke her granddaughter's hair. "So very proud of both of you." Since James's death and their mother's passing years before, Susan had raised the twins on her meager salary as a cleaner at Westfield Airfield. The walls of their apartment were adorned not with expensive art, but with framed pages from maintenance manuals, annotated in James's precise handwriting. His toolbox, the one the girls now treated as a sacred relic, was their most prized possession. "Got it," Emma exclaimed as the toaster's heating element finally slid back into place. When Olivia reconnected the final wire, both girls held their breath as they plugged it in. The familiar red glow illuminated their identical faces with triumph. That evening, after Mrs. Jenkins had collected her precious toaster with tears of gratitude, Susan sat at their small kitchen table reviewing bills by lamplight. Medical expenses, rent increases, and school supplies had stretched their budget beyond breaking. Tomorrow, she would have to bring the girls with her to work. The school holiday left no alternatives with their regular sitter unavailable. "Grandma?" Emma appeared in her nightgown, clutching one of her father's old journals. "Can we bring Dad's manuals tomorrow? We promised to finish our math homework, but after." Susan nodded, too tired to argue. "Just stay where I can see you. Mr. Collins is strict about having children in the hangars." Later, as the twins slept in their shared bed, Susan gazed at the photograph of her son-in-law in his military uniform. "They're extraordinary, James," she whispered, "but I'm afraid of what happens when the world discovers just how special they are." She couldn't have known that tomorrow would change everything, that the quiet life she had carefully constructed to protect James Parker's daughters was about to collide with the past she'd been avoiding for 5 long years. The dawn broke over Westfield Airfield, painting the hangars in hues of amber and gold. Susan hurried the twins through the employee entrance, their backpacks stuffed with homework and their father's precious maintenance journals. "Remember our rules," Susan whispered as she swiped her ID badge. "Stay in the staff lounge, finish your schoolwork, and don't wander." The airfield was unusually busy that morning. Emma and Olivia sat at a corner table in the maintenance office, pretending to focus on fractions while their eyes continuously drifted toward the large windows overlooking the tarmac. "Look!" Olivia nudged her sister as a sleek Gulfstream G650 approached the runway, its descent steeper than normal. Even to their young eyes, something seemed wrong with the aircraft's approach. The radio on the wall crackled to life. "Westfield Tower, this is November 775 Whiskey Bravo requesting emergency landing, experiencing unusual engine fluctuations." The twins exchanged glances. They had memorized enough of their father's flight manuals to recognize the gravity in the pilot's controlled voice. Within minutes, the jet had landed and was being towed toward the largest maintenance hangar. The twins watched as a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit emerged, his face a mask of controlled frustration as he spoke with the ground crew. "That's William Blackwood," whispered a passing mechanic to his colleague. "The billionaire. His chief mechanic, Marcus, is already calling for parts from Europe." The name meant nothing to the twins, but the mechanical problem intrigued them. When the staff rushed to assist, leaving the office momentarily empty, the girls slipped their father's journal from Emma's backpack. "Page 117, Emma said, flipping through the worn pages. "Dad wrote about engine calibration issues in the Pratt & Whitney PW800 series." Olivia peered over her sister's shoulder at their father's meticulous diagrams. "The symptoms sound similar." Through the windows, they could see a team of mechanics huddled around open panels of the Gulfstream's engine. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, presumably Marcus, gestured with increasing frustration. "They think it's mechanical," Emma whispered, "but Dad's notes suggest it could be a firmware conflict." The twins crept closer to the window, watching as diagnostic equipment was connected to the aircraft's systems. On a nearby monitor, they could see error codes flashing, codes they recognized from their father's journal. Susan appeared at the door, her face flushed from cleaning the executive lounge. "Girls, I told you to stay out of sight." "Grandma," Olivia said, clutching the journal, "we know what's wrong with that plane." Susan's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "This isn't like fixing Mrs. Jenkins' toaster. These are professional mechanics working on a multi-million-dollar aircraft." "But Dad's notes," Emma began. "No," Susan cut her off firmly. "We can't draw attention to ourselves. These are important people and we're just—" She stopped herself, the unspoken reality hanging between them. They were the family of a deceased military mechanic, surviving on a cleaner's salary, invisible in this world of wealth and power. As Susan led them back to their homework, Emma slipped their father's diagnostic drawing into her pocket. Outside, Marcus threw his hands up in frustration as another test failed. The twins exchanged a knowing look. Their grandmother might forbid them from getting involved, but they had inherited more than just their father's mechanical aptitude. They'd inherited his stubborn determination to solve whatever problem was in front of them, no matter the rules. And William Blackwood's plane had just become their most interesting problem yet. The maintenance crew's frustration grew palpable as the afternoon wore on. Through the office window, Emma and Olivia watched mechanics come and go, their faces increasingly grim. Susan had been called to clean the executive lounge where William Blackwood now waited, leaving the twins with strict instructions to stay put. "They're looking in the wrong place," Olivia whispered, studying the diagnostic drawing they had created based on their father's journals. "It's not the hardware." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the hangar where Marcus, Blackwood's chief mechanic, had just thrown his clipboard onto a workbench in frustration. "They're waiting for parts they don't need." The twins watched as the maintenance team dispersed for a late lunch break, leaving the hangar momentarily unattended. Only a junior technician remained, and he soon stepped away to answer a call. "Now," Emma said, sliding from her chair. Olivia hesitated. "Grandma said Dad would have helped," Emma replied simply. That was all it took. Seconds later, the twins slipped through the side door of the hangar, their small frames dwarfed by the massive Gulf Stream. They didn't touch anything. They knew better than that. Instead, they waited by the diagnostic computer where error codes still flashed on the screen. When Marcus returned, he froze at the sight of two identical 9-year-old girls in matching overalls standing beside the multi-million-dollar aircraft. "What the?" he began, his voice rising with alarm. "It's not the calibration assembly," Emma said quickly, holding out their drawing. "It's a firmware conflict." Marcus stared at them, bewildered, then at the detailed diagnostic diagram in Emma's outstretched hand. "How did you two get in here? Where are your parents?" "Our grandma cleans here," Olivia explained. "We've been watching your team all morning." "And you think you know what's wrong with this aircraft?" His tone was incredulous but not dismissive. 20 years in aviation had taught Marcus that solutions sometimes came from unexpected sources. Emma nodded. "The error codes match something our dad documented. The system is trying to run two conflicting firmware versions simultaneously." Marcus took the drawing, his skepticism giving way to curiosity as he studied their meticulous work. "This is surprisingly thorough. Your father was a mechanic?" "A helicopter mechanic," Olivia said proudly. "Captain James Parker. He died in Afghanistan." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Recognition, perhaps. But he quickly returned his attention to their diagram. "This suggests a manual override sequence. Dad called it forcing protocol dominance," Emma explained. "You can make the primary system take full control without waiting for the update." Marcus hesitated, torn between professional caution and the desperate need for a solution. Mr. Blackwood was due back any minute, expecting progress. "If you're wrong, you two disappear before I lose my job," he finally said, turning to the computer. The twins watched intently as Marcus input the sequence they had suggested. The error codes flickered, then changed. New diagnostics ran across the screen. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered as the system stabilized. He quickly ran a simulation, confirming the engines would now function normally. Just then, the hangar doors opened. William Blackwood strode in, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "Marcus, any progress?" Before Marcus could answer, he noticed the twins. His eyebrows rose questioningly. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, gesturing to the diagnostic screen, "I believe we've solved your problem, but I had some unexpected assistance." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Emma and Olivia, taking in their matching braids and oil-stained overalls. "From them?" "Yes, sir. These young ladies identified a firmware conflict our diagnostics missed. They provided the override sequence that stabilized the system." Blackwood looked skeptical. "They're children." "We learned from our dad's journals," Emma said, her voice small but steady under the billionaire's scrutiny. "And who was your father?" Blackwood asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Captain James Parker, sir," Olivia answered. "He was a helicopter mechanic in Afghanistan." The effect of the name was immediate and shocking. William Blackwood physically staggered, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost. "James Parker," he repeated, studying their faces with new intensity. "My God, you're his daughters." William Blackwood's hand trembled as he reached for the nearest workbench to steady himself. The hangar seemed to have fallen silent, though engines continued to roar on the tarmac outside. "James Parker," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "But that's impossible. I searched for his family. For years." The twins exchanged confused glances. Emma took a protective half-step in front of her sister, suddenly wary of this powerful man's intense reaction. "Sir?" Marcus approached, concerned by his employer's uncharacteristic display of emotion. "Are you all right?" Blackwood ignored him, his eyes fixed on the twins. "How old are you two?" "9, they answered in unison. "9, he echoed, performing a rapid mental calculation. "You would have been 4 when he—" His voice trailed off. The awkward moment was shattered by Susan's arrival. She burst into the hangar out of breath and flushed with panic. "Girls, what are you—" She froze when she saw Blackwood, recognition and fear washing over her face in equal measure. "Susan Winters," Blackwood said, his composure returning. "I didn't make the connection. You're using your maiden name now." Susan stepped between Blackwood and her granddaughters. "Mr. Blackwood, I apologize for any disruption. The girls shouldn't be here." "On the contrary," Marcus interjected, "these young ladies just saved us considerable time and expense. They correctly diagnosed a complex firmware issue that my entire team missed." Susan's protective stance faltered as she looked from the twins to the mechanics and back to Blackwood. "They... what?" "It appears," Blackwood said, studying the twins with newfound intensity, "that James's daughters inherited more than just his eyes. They have his remarkable technical intuition as well." The twins, sensing the tension between the adults, remained quiet. Emma clutched their father's journal tighter against her chest. "I'd like to speak with you privately, Mrs. Winters," Blackwood said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "My office is in the executive hangar." "The girls," Susan began. "Marcus will show them the aircraft systems. After all, they've earned a proper tour after saving my company thousands in unnecessary repairs." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That is, if they're interested." Despite their grandmother's obvious discomfort, the twins' faces lit up at the prospect. Technical curiosity won over caution. "I'll stay with them personally, Mrs. Winters," Marcus assured her. "No harm will come to them." Susan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "1 hour," she said firmly. As Susan followed Blackwood from the hangar, the billionaire paused to study the twins once more, his gaze lingering on their faces with an intensity that made even Marcus uncomfortable. "The resemblance is remarkable," Blackwood murmured. "James's daughters, after all this time." While Marcus showed the fascinated twins around the aircraft, Susan walked stiffly beside Blackwood to the executive hangar. Inside his luxurious office, she remained standing, declining his offer to sit. "I knew this day might come," she said quietly, "but I had hoped to spare them until they were older." Blackwood poured himself a whiskey with an unsteady hand. 5 years, Susan. I've had investigators searching for James's family since his death. Military records showed no surviving dependents." "That was deliberate," Susan replied. "After my daughter died, James updated his military paperwork. He wanted to protect the girls from..." She paused. "From exactly this." "From me?" Blackwood's voice carried a mixture of hurt and indignation. "James saved my life." "Did he tell you that?" "He pulled me from burning wreckage when we were ambushed. I've spent years trying to repay that debt." "And now you've found them," Susan said, her tone brittle. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Glancing at the screen, Blackwood's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "It seems your granddaughters have impressed Marcus even further. He's just informed me they've identified a more efficient routing for the diagnostic system." He looked up at Susan, his expression unreadable. "Those girls are extraordinary, just like their father." Susan's protective instincts flared. "They're children, Mr. Blackwood, not assets to be acquired." "No," he agreed softly, his gaze drifting to a photograph on his desk that Susan couldn't see. "They're James's legacy, and that means they're far more important than you realize." The silence between Susan and Blackwood stretched uncomfortably until he gestured toward a leather chair. "Please sit. What I have to share might take a moment." Susan reluctantly sat, her back rigid, eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "James and I served together for 3 years in Afghanistan," Blackwood began, staring into his whiskey. "Not many people know I had a military background before building my company. I was a test pilot for experimental aircraft. James was assigned as my primary maintenance engineer." He walked to a credenza and retrieved a framed photograph, passing it to Susan. In it, a younger Blackwood stood beside James Parker, both in dusty uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders. They were laughing. "We became close friends despite our different backgrounds," Blackwood continued. "James was brilliant, could diagnose problems no one else could even identify. He developed innovations that saved countless lives, including mine." Susan studied the photograph. Her son-in-law looked carefree, so different from the troubled man who had visited them shortly before his final deployment. The ambush happened during a routine transport mission, Blackwood said, his voice dropping. RPG hit our helicopter. I was trapped in the wreckage when James pulled me out. He went back for another man when... His voice faltered. The official report called it an act of extraordinary heroism. I know how my son-in-law died, Mr. Blackwood, Susan said quietly. After his death, I searched for his family to provide support, Blackwood continued. Military records showed his wife, your daughter, had died earlier and listed no dependents. How could there be no record of those girls? Susan's hands twisted in her lap. After my daughter died, James became paranoid about the girls' safety. He modified his military paperwork to show no dependents and listed me as his only contact, using my maiden name. He wanted to protect them from what he called dangerous attention. From what? Blackwood pressed. Susan met his gaze directly. From you, Mr. Blackwood, or more specifically from Blackwood Industries. Blackwood recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about? James's last letters were troubled, Susan explained. He mentioned ethical concerns about technology he helped develop. Something about a stabilization system that could be weaponized. He was planning to leave the military to protect his work. The HASS system, Blackwood said flatly. Helicopter, Advanced Stabilization System. Yes, James was instrumental in its development. He died 2 weeks after writing that letter, Susan said, her voice brittle with old pain. Then suddenly Blackwood Industries announces a revolutionary helicopter stabilization technology. The timing seemed convenient. Anger flashed across Blackwood's face, quickly replaced by something more complex. You think I had something to do with James's death? That I stole his work? I think a man with resources like yours could make many things happen, Susan replied carefully. And I think those little girls are all I have left of my family. Blackwood set down his glass with deliberate control. James was developing that system under military contract. After his death, the military transferred development rights to my company because we had the expertise to complete it. Everything was legal. I'm not questioning the legality, Mr. Blackwood. A heavy silence fell between them. From outside came the distant sound of the twins' excited voices as Marcus concluded their tour. Those girls, Blackwood finally said, are extraordinary. They have James's gift. Keeping them away from proper education and opportunities won't protect them. It will waste their potential. Their potential is not your concern, Susan countered. It became my concern the moment they walked into my hangar and solved a problem my best engineers couldn't crack, Blackwood replied. And it's been my concern since I learned James Parker had children. I owe him my life. Susan studied the man before her. Powerful, wealthy, clearly accustomed to getting his way. Yet something in his expression seemed genuine, a complexity. Beyond simple guilt or obligation. What exactly do you want, Mr. Blackwood? She asked again. To help them, he answered simply. The Westfield STEM Academy could nurture their abilities. Full scholarships, of course. And in return? Blackwood met her gaze directly. The chance to fulfill a promise I made to a dying friend. James's last words to me weren't about technology or ethics, Susan. They were about his daughters. Take care of my girls, he said. I've been trying to find them ever since. Before Susan could respond, the door opened, and the twins burst in, faces flushed with excitement from their tour, unaware of the tension in the room or how their futures hung in the delicate balance between these two adults with a shared, complicated past. Marcus showed us the navigation system, Emma exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. He said it uses principles similar to what Dad was working on. Olivia nodded eagerly. And he let us look at the maintenance manuals. They're not as good as Dad's notes, though. The twins' enthusiasm faltered as they registered the tension in the room. They moved closer to Susan, suddenly wary. Grandma? Emma questioned, her hand slipping into Susan's. Blackwood cleared his throat. Your grandmother and I were just discussing your father, He was a remarkable man. He crouched down to their eye level, a gesture that seemed practiced yet genuine. I understand you've been studying his technical journals? The twins exchanged quick glances. Their silent communication that Susan had learned meant they were deciding how much to trust an adult. Yes, sir, Olivia finally answered. We've memorized most of them. Memorized? Blackwood couldn't hide his surprise. They have photographic memories, Susan explained reluctantly. Another gift from their father. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. Girls, would you mind if I spoke with your grandmother privately for just a few more minutes? Marcus mentioned the vending machines in the pilot's lounge. Perhaps you could get yourselves a snack. He held out a $20 bill. Susan gave a subtle nod of permission, and the twins accepted the money before leaving. Though they're curious, glances backward made it clear they understood something significant was happening. Once the door closed, Blackwood returned to his desk. Susan, those girls have extraordinary potential. Potential that can't be fully developed without proper resources. We manage just fine, Susan replied stiffly. Do you? Blackwood's tone was gentle but probing. A cleaner's salary, raising twin prodigies? How many opportunities have you had to sacrifice? Susan's silence was answer enough. The Westfield STEM Academy is the finest technical school in the country, Blackwood continued. Students there have access to labs, equipment, and mentors most engineering graduate students would envy. The twins would thrive there. At what cost? Susan challenged. Nothing comes without strings, Mr. Blackwood, especially from men like you. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. Men like me. Powerful. Men who collect brilliant minds to serve their interests, Susan said. James's last letters mentioned his discomfort with how his innovations were being applied. He was planning to leave the military, to protect his work from being weaponized. James and I had our disagreements, Blackwood acknowledged. He was an idealist, sometimes naively so. Military technology saves lives, Susan, but yes, sometimes it takes them too. That complexity troubled him. And it doesn't trouble you? Of course it does, Blackwood replied sharply. But I live in the real world, where difficult choices must be made. Susan stood. And that's exactly the world I'm trying to protect those girls from. Their brilliance comes with responsibility. James understood that, which is precisely why they need proper guidance. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. He took a breath, regaining control. I'm not offering this because of guilt, Susan. I genuinely care about those girls because they're James's daughters, and because their minds are extraordinary gifts that shouldn't be wasted. And what happens when they develop something valuable to Blackwood Industries? Susan pressed. Do you own their innovations as you apparently owned their father's? Blackwood's jaw tightened. That isn't fair, isn't it? Susan gathered her purse. Thank you for your offer, Mr. Blackwood, but we'll continue as we have been. The door opened and the twins returned, sensing the conclusion of the adults' conversation. Girls, Blackwood said, his voice softening. It was an honor to meet you, both. Your father would be incredibly proud of what you did today. Thank you for letting us see the plane, Emma replied politely. Will we see you again? Olivia asked directly, earning a sharp glance from Susan. Blackwood smiled. I certainly hope so. In fact, he reached for a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Emma. My private number, if you or your grandmother ever need anything at all, please call. As Susan ushered the twins toward the door, Blackwood added, Susan, my offer stands. Those girls deserve every opportunity their father would have wanted for them. Susan paused at the threshold. James wanted them safe, Mr. Blackwood, above all else. Safe? Yes, Blackwood replied, but not hidden away from their potential. James never would have wanted that. The twins looked between the adults, absorbing the undercurrents they didn't fully understand but instinctively recognized as important to their future. We'll be in touch, Blackwood said with quiet confidence as the door closed behind them. The apartment felt unusually silent that evening. The twins sat at the kitchen table, homework long finished, pretending not to notice their grandmother's distracted movements as she prepared dinner. "He knew Dad," Emma finally said, breaking the tension. "Mr. Blackwood." Susan placed 3 mismatched plates on the table with a sigh. "Yes, they served together." "Why didn't you tell us?" Olivia asked. Susan's hands stilled. "There were complications in your father's relationship with Mr. Blackwood, things you're too young to understand. We fixed his plane," Emma pointed out. "Are we too young for that, too?" Susan looked at her granddaughters, really looked at them. Their faces, so like her daughters, held expressions far too mature for 9-year-olds. She often forgot how much they comprehended. "You're right," she conceded. "You deserve some answers." She sat down, pushing the cooling food aside. "Your father was troubled before his final deployment. He sent letters expressing concerns about work he'd done, a helicopter stabilization system. He believed Blackwood might use it in ways he hadn't intended." "Weapons," Olivia said softly, surprising Susan. "Dad wrote about dual applications in his journals," Emma explained. "Systems that could save lives or take them, depending on programming." Susan felt a chill. How much had James revealed in those technical journals the girls had memorized? "After dinner," Susan said, "I'm going to call someone who might help us understand what's at stake." Later that evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Susan dialed, a number she hadn't used in years. Margaret Reynolds speaking. "Margaret, it's Susan Winters, James Parker's mother-in-law." A pause. "Susan, it's been 5 years? I need your counsel, Margaret. The twins met William Blackwood today." The silence on the line became weighted. Margaret Reynolds had been a legal consultant for Blackwood Industries when James was alive, and she'd left the company shortly after his death. She was also the person who had helped Susan establish their new life using her maiden name. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. An hour later, Susan sat in Margaret's downtown office, the city lights twinkling below the 20th floor window. "Blackwood's offer seems generous on the surface," Margaret said, reviewing her notes. "Full scholarships to Westfield Academy is no small thing. Those girls could receive education worth millions." "But," Susan prompted, but James's concerns were valid. Margaret pulled a folder from her desk. "After I left Blackwood Industries, I kept documentation. James had raised ethical flags about the HASS system, Helicopter Advanced Stabilization System. He designed it for rescue operations in extreme conditions, but its applications for unmanned combat vehicles were significant. Weaponized drones," Susan translated. Margaret nodded. "After James's death, Blackwood's company developed the system commercially. It's now used in both humanitarian and military applications worldwide." "And legally?" "That's where it gets complicated." Margaret leaned forward. "James filed preliminary patent applications before his military deployment as a private citizen. Usually, military work belongs to the government. But James was careful to document his personal intellectual contributions." Susan's breath caught. "Are you saying the twins might have legal claims?" "Potentially. If James's private documentation matches what the girls have in those journals, and if his death and their disappearance obscured rightful intellectual property claims." Margaret's expression was grave. "Blackwood's sudden interest might not be entirely altruistic. There could be a significant liability concern mixed with his genuine affection for James. So the scholarships could be a step towards securing legal releases." "Yes," Margaret confirmed, "but that doesn't mean he doesn't also genuinely care about the girls. Human motivations are rarely simple, Susan." Susan stared out at the city lights. "What should I do?" "First, we need to see exactly what James left behind," Margaret advised. "You mentioned a trunk in storage?" "With his military effects. I've never had the heart to go through it thoroughly." "That needs to change," Margaret said firmly. "If there's documentation of his patent applications or design ownership, it could significantly affect the girl's future." "And Blackwood's offer?" "Delay," Margaret advised. "Tell him you're considering it. Meanwhile, we'll assess what James left behind." As Susan prepared to leave, Margaret added, "Susan, those girls fixed a multi-million-dollar aircraft that stumped professional engineers. Their abilities won't stay hidden for long. Blackwood found them. Others will too. Protecting them might mean more than just keeping them away from Blackwood. Susan nodded grimly. I know. That's what terrifies me. Outside Margaret's office, Susan checked her phone. 3 missed calls, all from William Blackwood's private number. He wasn't waiting for her decision. He was already moving forward, confident that the inevitable logic of the situation would bring James Parker's daughters into his orbit. And the worst part was, Susan wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. Dr. Rebecca Chen stared at the diagnostic report on her screen, then at the handwritten notes beside it. As Chief Innovation Officer at Blackwood Industries, she'd seen remarkable engineering solutions before, but rarely from 9-year-old children. This override sequence is elegant, she murmured to herself. Unconventional, but elegant. A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. William Blackwood entered without waiting for a response. You've reviewed the Parker twins' solution? He asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Yes, Rebecca replied, gesturing to her monitor. It's remarkable. They identified a firmware conflict our diagnostics missed completely. The approach is unorthodox, almost, intuitive rather than procedural, like their father, Blackwood said quietly. Rebecca studied her boss carefully. She joined Blackwood Industries 3 years after James Parker's death. But his legacy loomed large in the company's most innovative technologies. The Haas system, in particular, bore the unmistakable signature of his creative problem-solving. You want these girls in the company pipeline, she observed. It wasn't a question. I want them to have opportunities their father would have wanted for them. Blackwood corrected. Their grandmother is hesitant. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. At 40, she'd spent her career navigating the complex politics of being both brilliant and female in male-dominated industries. She understood protective instincts. Perhaps because she senses you have mixed motivations, Rebecca suggested bluntly. She was one of the few people who could speak to Blackwood this way. Surprisingly, he nodded. The situation is complicated. Complicated how? Blackwood hesitated, then said, There may be intellectual property considerations regarding their father's work, nothing that can't be managed ethically, but still. You're worried about liability, Rebecca finished. And you want me to do what exactly? Evaluate them, Blackwood said. Independently. As someone who joined after James's time, you have no historical bias. As a former child prodigy yourself, you understand what they might need educationally. Rebecca considered this. She had been 16 when she entered MIT, 24 when she completed her second doctorate. She knew the isolation of exceptional intelligence, the challenges of developing at a different rate than peers, and if I find they're better off without Blackwood Industries' involvement. Blackwood's expression tightened momentarily. Then I'll respect that assessment. Rebecca wasn't entirely convinced, but her curiosity about the twins was genuine. I'll meet them, she agreed, but on neutral ground without you present, and I make no promises about my recommendations. 2 days later, Rebecca sat across from Emma and Olivia Parker at a table in the children's section of the public library. Susan watched warily from a nearby reading nook, close enough to intervene but giving them space to talk. Your solution to the Gulf Stream problem was impressive, Rebecca began. Where did you learn to think that way? Our dad's journals, Emma answered. But not just copying, Olivia added quickly. He taught us to look for what doesn't fit the pattern. Rebecca nodded, setting out a small technical puzzle on the table, a disassembled electronic device with seemingly mismatched components. Can you tell me what this might be? She asked. The twins studied it silently, fingers occasionally moving components, without touching them, as if mentally reassembling the device. Rebecca recognized the behavior. She did the same thing when visualizing complex systems. It's a signal jammer, Emma eventually said. But modified, Olivia continued. The frequency range is customized for something specific. Aircraft navigation, Emma concluded. Probably for testing security protocols. Rebecca concealed her surprise. She deliberately obscured the device's purpose by removing key identifiers. "What would you improve?" she asked. Without hesitation, the twins described 3 modifications that would extend battery life and reduce detection probability. Rebecca had considered 2 of them herself. The third was novel. As their conversation continued, Rebecca found herself increasingly impressed. The twins weren't just technically gifted. They had an intuitive grasp of systems thinking that couldn't be taught. Later, meeting with Susan while the twins explored the library's technical section, Rebecca was direct. "Your granddaughters have extraordinary minds," she said. "Minds that need stimulation and guidance they can't get in a standard educational environment." "And you think Blackwood is the answer?" Susan asked skeptically. "I think specialized education is necessary," Rebecca replied carefully. "Whether that comes through Blackwood or another avenue is a separate question." Susan studied the younger woman. "You're not what I expected." "Because I'm not simply advocating for my employer?" Rebecca smiled slightly. "I value exceptional minds. I also understand the challenges these girls will face. Child prodigies need protection, not exploitation." "And which is Blackwood offering?" "Both, probably," Rebecca answered honestly. His interest in the twins is genuine, but complicated by history and business concerns. "Those business concerns involve my son-in-law's intellectual property," Susan said pointedly. Rebecca nodded. "I suspected as much. Which means you have leverage, Mrs. Winters. Use it." The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a maze of identical metal units baking in the afternoon sun. Susan fumbled with the padlock, the key sticking from years of disuse. "Let me try, Grandma," Emma offered, taking the key and working it with careful precision until the lock clicked open. The overhead door groaned as Susan pulled it upward, revealing a small space filled with stacked boxes and furniture draped in dust covers. The air smelled of cardboard and forgotten memories. "There," Susan pointed to the far corner. "The military trunk." It sat alone, separate from the other possessions. A green metal footlocker with Captain J. Parker stenciled on the lid. Susan had brought it home after James's funeral, then stored it away when the pain of looking at it became too much. The twins approached it reverently, understanding its significance without being told. "Can we open it?" Olivia asked softly. Susan nodded, her throat tight. "That's why we're here." Together, they maneuvered the heavy trunk into Susan's aging station wagon and drove home in contemplative silence. Once in their apartment, Susan cleared the kitchen table, and they set the trunk in the center like a sacred object. "James would have wanted you to have these things," Susan said, unlocking the trunk with a small key she kept on her personal keyring. "I should have given them to you sooner." The lid creaked open, revealing neat stacks of military uniforms on top. Susan carefully removed these, setting them aside with misty eyes. Beneath were manila folders, notebooks, and plastic document cases. "His technical journals," Emma whispered, recognizing similar bindings to the ones they already studied. "And so much more," Susan added, lifting out the first folder. For the next 2 hours, they methodically went through the contents. There were letters, photographs, official military documents, and technical specifications. The twins handled each item carefully, their photographic memories absorbing every detail. "Look at this," Olivia said, holding up a notebook labeled Teaching Notes, ENO. Inside were simplified technical diagrams and explanations, clearly created for young children to understand complex mechanical concepts. "He was preparing these for you," Susan realized, her voice breaking. "Even before his last deployment, he was creating materials to teach you engineering. That's why we understand his advanced journals," Emma said quietly. "He built a foundation for us first." Deeper in the trunk, they found a leather portfolio containing detailed designs for the HASS system, diagrams, calculations, and handwritten notes showing the evolution of James's thinking. "These are dated before his military service," Susan noted, examining the timestamps. "He was developing this independently. And look," Olivia pointed to a stamped document within the portfolio. Provisional patent application. Susan's hand trembled as she read the official paperwork. James had indeed filed preliminary patents as a private citizen, documenting his ownership of the core concepts before the military had involved Blackwood Industries. Margaret was right, she murmured. At the very bottom of the trunk lay a sealed envelope addressed to Emma and Olivia, "When you're ready." Susan handed it to the twins, who looked at her questioningly. "It's addressed to you," she said simply. Emma carefully broke the seal and unfolded several handwritten pages. The twins read in unison, their faces growing solemn as they absorbed their father's words. "He knew he might not come back," Olivia whispered. "What does it say?" Susan asked gently. Emma looked up, her young face serious. "He explains the HASS system, how it could save lives in rescue operations by stabilizing helicopters in extreme conditions, but also how it could be weaponized," Olivia continued, "especially for remote-controlled aircraft. He was worried about that part." Emma turned the page. "He says he was planning to leave the military after that deployment, that he had concerns about how his work was being used. And there's this," Olivia pointed to a paragraph near the end. "He writes that if anything happens to him, we should know that Mr. Blackwood might come looking for us someday. He says Blackwood is a good man who sometimes justifies questionable choices for what he believes are right reasons," Emma read, "and that we should be careful but not afraid." Susan took a shaky breath. "What else?" Emma turned to the final page. "He says his greatest hope is that we'll use our minds to build things that can only help people, never harm them, and that he trusts us to understand the difference." The three sat in silence, surrounded by the physical remnants of James Parker's life and work, the tangible proof of both his technical brilliance and his ethical concerns. In his final letter, he had acknowledged the complexity of his relationship with Blackwood, while placing his ultimate faith in his daughter's judgment. "We need to talk to Mr. Blackwood again," Emma said finally, looking at her grandmother with eyes too wise for her years. "Dad would want us to hear his side too." Susan nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her granddaughter's words and the undeniable truth that had been confirmed by the trunk's contents. James had been preparing his daughters for this moment, all along. William Blackwood's private office occupied the top floor of Blackwood Industries' downtown headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city, a physical manifestation of the power he wielded. Susan sat rigidly in a leather chair, a portfolio of documents on her lap. She had come alone, leaving the twins with Margaret, a decision that clearly surprised Blackwood. "I expected you'd bring Emma and Olivia," he remarked, settling behind his imposing desk. "This conversation needs to happen between adults first," Susan replied evenly. "We've been through James's military trunk." If Blackwood was unsettled by this statement, he hid it well. "I imagine that was difficult for you emotionally. Enlightening is a better word." Susan opened the portfolio and placed a document on his desk. James filed provisional patents for the HASS system before his military deployment as a private citizen. Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral as he examined the paperwork. "I see." He also left detailed records of his development process, proving the core concepts were created independently, not under military contract. Blackwood leaned back slightly, assessing Susan with new respect. "Margaret Reynolds has been advising you. Does that matter?" "It matters that you're well informed," he replied, though not completely. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Alice, bring in the Parker file, please." They sat in tense silence until his assistant delivered a thick folder. Blackwood opened it, removing several documents. "Our legal department conducted an internal audit last year, reviewing intellectual property across all major projects," he explained, sliding a report toward Susan. "They flagged concerns about the HASS system's ownership pathway." Susan scanned the document, her eyes widening slightly at the unusually candid internal assessment. "You already knew," she realized, "that James filed preliminary patents?" "Yes." Blackwood's tone was matter-of-fact. "What I didn't know was that he had children," The audit recommended locating any heirs who might have claims. He gestured to the report. You'll note the date. This was months before the twins fixed my aircraft. Susan studied him carefully. So your sudden appearance in our lives wasn't entirely coincidental. The world rarely offers pure coincidences, Susan. But finding James's daughters at Westfield Airfield genuinely surprised me. A hint of emotion finally cracked his professional facade. When they mentioned their father's name, it was like seeing a ghost. And your offer of education? Comes from multiple motivations, Blackwood admitted frankly. Yes, there's a legal obligation to address potential intellectual property claims, but there's also a genuine desire to fulfill a promise to my friend, and honest amazement at those girls' abilities. He met her gaze directly. Human motivations are rarely simple. Susan almost smiled at hearing her own words from Margaret echoed back to her. So where does that leave us? In a place where we can be honest, Blackwood replied. The Haas system has generated substantial revenue. James's contributions were foundational. His heirs have legitimate claims that should be addressed. His tone became more businesslike. But legal battles are expensive, time-consuming, and harmful to everyone involved. I'd prefer a solution that honors James's legacy while providing for his daughters. And that solution conveniently includes bringing them into your orbit? Susan challenged. It includes giving them the education their father would have wanted, Blackwood countered. And yes, I hope someday they might consider Blackwood Industries worthy of their talents. But that would be their choice, not a condition. Susan considered his words carefully. James had concerns about how his technology was being used. Something like pain flickered across Blackwood's face. I know. We argued about it before his last deployment. He wanted stricter limitations on military applications. He paused. After his death, I did implement some of the ethical frameworks he proposed, though not all of them. Why not all? Because sometimes I believed he was being idealistic rather than practical, Blackwood answered honestly. That's where we differed. James saw the world as it should be. I see it as it is. Susan nodded slowly, appreciating his candor even if she didn't fully trust his conclusions. The girls want to meet with you again, she said finally. They read their father's letter. He acknowledged your friendship while expressing his concerns. James always saw the complexity in people, Blackwood said quietly. Even when we disagreed. The twins are like him in that way, Susan observed. They're also adamant about continuing their education. After meeting Dr. Chen, they've been researching the Westfield Academy incessantly. Rebecca tends to inspire that reaction, Blackwood said with a slight smile. Before we move forward, Susan said, her voice firm, I need to know that any arrangement we make acknowledges both their father's intellectual contributions and respects his ethical concerns. I believe we can find common ground, Blackwood replied. For James's daughters, I'm willing to navigate some uncomfortable compromises. As Susan gathered her documents, she felt the weight of responsibility for her granddaughter's future. The path forward would require careful negotiation between protecting them and allowing them to flourish. James trusted those girls' judgment, she said, pausing at the door. Perhaps it's time I fully do the same. William Blackwood's private office occupied the top floor of Blackwood Industries' downtown headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city, a physical manifestation of the power he wielded. Susan sat rigidly in a leather chair, a portfolio of documents on her lap. She had come alone, leaving the twins with Margaret, a decision that clearly surprised Blackwood. I expected you'd bring Emma and Olivia, he remarked, settling behind his imposing desk. This conversation needs to happen between adults first, Susan replied evenly. We've been through James's military trunk. If Blackwood was unsettled by this statement, he hit it well. I imagine that was difficult for you emotionally. Enlightening is a better word. Susan opened the portfolio and placed a document on his desk. James filed provisional patents for the Haas system before his military deployment, as a private citizen. Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral as he examined the paperwork. I see. He also left detailed records of his development process, proving the core concepts were created independently, not under military contract. Blackwood leaned back slightly, assessing Susan with new respect. Margaret Reynolds has been advising you. Does that matter? It matters that you're well-informed, he replied. Though not completely. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Alice, bring in the Parker file, please. They sat in tense silence until his assistant delivered a thick folder. Blackwood opened it, removing several documents. Our legal department conducted an internal audit last year, reviewing intellectual property across all major projects, he explained, sliding a report toward Susan. They flagged concerns about the Haas system's ownership pathway. Susan scanned the document, her eyes widening slightly at the unusually candid internal assessment. You already knew, she realized, that James filed preliminary patents? Yes. Blackwood's tone was matter-of-fact. What I didn't know was that he had children. The audit recommended locating any heirs who might have claims. He gestured to the report. You'll note the date. This was months before the twins fixed my aircraft. Susan studied him carefully. So your sudden appearance in our lives wasn't entirely coincidental. The world rarely offers pure coincidences, Susan. But finding James's daughters at Westfield Airfield genuinely surprised me. A hint of emotion finally cracked his professional facade. When they mentioned their father's name, it was like seeing a ghost. And your offer of education comes from multiple motivations, Blackwood admitted frankly. Yes, there's a legal obligation to address potential intellectual property claims, but there's also a genuine desire to fulfill a promise to my friend, and honest amazement at those girls' abilities. He met her gaze directly. Human motivations are rarely simple. Susan almost smiled at hearing her own words from Margaret echoed, back to her. So where does that leave us? In a place where we can be honest, Blackwood replied. The Haas system has generated substantial revenue. James's contributions were foundational. His heirs have legitimate claims that should be addressed. His tone became more businesslike. But legal battles are expensive, time-consuming, and harmful to everyone involved. I'd prefer a solution that honors James's legacy while providing for his daughters. And that solution conveniently includes bringing them into your orbit? Susan challenged. It includes giving them the education their father would have wanted, Blackwood countered. And yes, I hope someday they might consider Blackwood Industries worthy of their talents. But that would be their choice, not a condition. Susan considered his words carefully. James had concerns about how his technology was being used. Something like pain flickered across Blackwood's face. I know. We argued about it before his last deployment. He wanted stricter limitations on military applications. He paused. After his death, I did implement some of the ethical frameworks he proposed, though not all of them. Why not all? Because sometimes I believed he was being idealistic rather than practical, Blackwood answered honestly. That's where we differed. James saw the world as it should be. I see it as it is. Susan nodded slowly, appreciating his candor, even if she didn't fully trust his conclusions. The girls want to meet with you again, she said finally. They read their father's letter. He acknowledged your friendship while expressing his concerns. James always saw the complexity in people, Blackwood said quietly. Even when we disagreed. The twins are like him in that way, Susan observed. They're also adamant about continuing their education. After meeting Dr. Chen, they've been researching the Westfield Academy incessantly. Rebecca tends to inspire that reaction, Blackwood said with a slight smile. Before we move forward, Susan said, her voice firm, I need to know that any arrangement we make acknowledges both their father's intellectual contributions and respects his ethical concerns. I believe we can find common ground, Blackwood replied. For James's daughters, I'm willing to navigate some uncomfortable compromises. As Susan gathered her documents, she felt the weight of responsibility for her granddaughter's future. The path forward would require careful negotiation between protecting them and allowing them to flourish. James trusted those girls' judgment. she said, pausing at the door. Perhaps it's time I fully do the same. The conference room at Margaret Reynolds' law office provided neutral ground for the final negotiations. Around the polished oak table sat Susan, Margaret, William Blackwood, his legal counsel, and Dr. Rebecca Chen. The twins waited in an adjoining room, aware that their future was being decided but trusting their grandmother to protect their interests. "Let's review the proposed agreement," Margaret said, distributing copies of a document bearing the morning's date. "Mr. Blackwood has acknowledged the intellectual property contributions of Captain James Parker to the HASS system and related technologies." Blackwood nodded. "The company will establish a trust for Emma and Olivia Parker, with appropriate royalties from the relevant patents. The specific percentages are outlined on page 3. Susan studied the figures, her eyes widening slightly. The amounts would ensure the twins' financial security well into adulthood. Additionally, Margaret continued, Blackwood Industries will establish the Parker Innovation Foundation, dedicated to identifying technically gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds and providing educational opportunities, with an initial endowment of $20 million, Blackwood added, and annual contributions of at least $1 million thereafter. Susan looked up from the document. "This is considerably more generous than our initial discussions." "The foundation was actually Rebecca's suggestion," Blackwood said, nodding toward Dr. Chen. "She made a compelling case that it would honor James's values while helping other children who might otherwise fall through the cracks of our educational system." Rebecca leaned forward. "The foundation will identify children with exceptional technical aptitude and provide tailored educational pathways. Emma and Olivia would be its first beneficiaries, but certainly not its last." "This brings us to the education provisions," Margaret continued. "The twins would attend Westfield Academy, with full scholarships through college if they choose to continue there, with Dr. Chen serving as their technical mentor," Blackwood added. Susan's lawyer reviewed the housing arrangements, and Mrs. Winters would maintain full guardianship with appropriate housing provided near the academy. The property would be placed in a separate trust for the twins, not controlled by Blackwood Industries. "This ensures their independence," Margaret explained to Susan. "They benefit from the opportunities without becoming beholden to Mr. Blackwood or his company." Susan considered the proposal carefully. "And the ethical oversight for James's technologies?" "Page 7, Rebecca directed. "The twins would have seats on the ethics committee overseeing applications of their father's innovations when they reach appropriate age. Until then, Susan would hold a proxy vote. We've also included a clause requiring Blackwood Industries to contribute to humanitarian applications of the technology," Margaret noted. "At least 30% of HASS system deployment must be for rescue and civilian operations, not military use." Blackwood's lawyer shifted uncomfortably at this point, but Blackwood himself nodded. "It's a reasonable compromise. James would have pushed for 50%. But this is sustainable from a business perspective while still honoring his concerns." Susan sat back considering the comprehensive proposal. It recognized James's intellectual contributions, provided for his daughter's education and financial security, created opportunities for other gifted children, and addressed the ethical applications of his technology. "Before I agree," Susan said, "I'd like the twins to hear the proposal directly. They're old enough to understand what's being decided." When Emma and Olivia entered the room, they listened attentively as Blackwood and Rebecca outlined the agreement. Their questions were precise and thoughtful, focusing particularly on the foundation structure and the ethics committee's powers. "What happens if Blackwood Industries wants to use Dad's technology in ways the ethics committee doesn't approve?" Emma asked directly. "The agreement includes binding arbitration," Margaret explained, "and the company would need to demonstrate compelling public interest to override committee concerns." The twins exchanged one of their silent looks, communicating in that mysterious way only they understood. "One more condition," Olivia said with surprising authority. "The foundation should also sponsor an annual award for innovations that can only be used for peaceful purposes, to encourage what Dad believed in." Blackwood considered this, then nodded. "The James Parker Humanitarian Innovation Award. I think that's an excellent addition." After the twins returned to the waiting room, Susan looked around the table. It seems we've found a path forward that serves everyone's interest while honoring James's legacy. Not adversaries, but partners in preserving your son-in-law's contributions, Margaret summarized. As Susan signed the agreement, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the twins' future was secure, pride in their maturity and insight, and a bittersweet certainty that James would approve of this resolution, one that acknowledged both his brilliant mind and his compassionate heart. James once told me, Blackwood said quietly as they concluded, that his greatest hope was that his work would help more people than it harmed. I believe this agreement honors that wish. Susan nodded. It's a beginning. 6 months later, autumn, leaves swirled around the modest craftsman house where Susan now lived with the twins. Located just 3 blocks from Westfield Academy, it provided the perfect balance. Close enough for the girls to attend school, yet separate from the Blackwood corporate campus. We're going to be late. Susan called up the stairs, checking her watch nervously. The twins thundered down, now 10 years old and dressed in the Academy's Navy uniforms, their matching backpacks bulging with projects. Dr. Chen won't start without us, Emma said confidently, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. She's presenting our power efficiency modifications today, Olivia added, excitement brightening her face. In the 6 months since the agreement, the twins had thrived at Westfield Academy. Their natural abilities, finally given proper structure and resources, had blossomed even beyond expectations. Yet Susan had insisted on maintaining aspects of normal childhood, limited screen time, regular family dinners, and weekend activities that had nothing to do with engineering. The Parker Innovation Foundation had taken shape quickly, with Susan serving as community outreach coordinator 3 days a week. Already they had identified 7 other exceptionally gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds who would begin specialized education programs next semester. Mrs. Winters, William, Blackwood's driver called out as they approached the car that would take the twins to school. Mr. Blackwood asked if he might join you for the presentation today. Susan had developed a cautious working relationship with Blackwood. His interest in the twins seemed to evolve from obligation to genuine engagement. He was particularly fascinated by their approach to engineering problems. They tackled challenges with their father's innovative thinking, but without adult constraints. Of course, Susan replied. Tell him we'll meet him in the exhibition hall. Later that morning, watching the twins confidently explain their modifications to a room of engineers and students, Susan felt a complex pride. Blackwood sat nearby, his attention fully focused on their presentation. When Emma demonstrated how their power efficiency improvements reduced energy consumption by 27%, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. They continue to amaze me, he commented quietly to Susan. They don't just understand the technology, they see possibilities the rest of us miss. Susan nodded. James always said that children sometimes find solutions because they don't yet know what's supposed to be impossible. As the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, Susan watched the twins accept congratulations with a mixture of confidence and humility that would have made their father proud. Whatever the future held, she knew now that James's legacy lived on, not just in the technologies he created, but in the brilliant minds of his daughters and the values they were determined to uphold. Under Dr. Chen's structured guidance, the twins began formally studying their father's stabilization system. No longer just imitating his work, they now truly understood its technical principles. The core algorithm has redundancies, Emma observed one afternoon in the Academy's Innovation Lab, holographic components of the HAS system rotating before them. Dad was being cautious, Olivia nodded, but we could streamline it here and here. She highlighted sections with quick gestures. Dr. Chen watched in fascination as the twins reimagined their father's work from their unique perspective, identifying potential improvements even company engineers had missed. When she presented their insights to Blackwood, his expression transformed from polite interest to genuine amazement. It's uncanny, he murmured, reviewing their modifications. They've captured James's intuitive brilliance but applied it with fresh eyes. Blackwood immediately arranged for proper credit and additional patent protections in the twins' names. Their improvements would not only enhance the system's performance, but expand its applications to smaller aircraft, previously unable to accommodate the technology. They're not just preserving their father's legacy, Dr. Chen told Susan. They're extending it in ways even James might not have imagined. Susan watched her granddaughters working together seamlessly, completing each other's thoughts as they refined their father's innovation. In their focused expressions, she saw echoes of James, his determination, his creativity, and most importantly, his desire to create technology that served humanity's highest purposes. Dr. Rebecca Chen's advanced engineering lab was a wonderland of cutting-edge technology. Glass walls displayed schematics that could be manipulated with gesture controls. 3D printers hummed softly in corners, and prototype components lined specialized workbenches. In the center of this technological paradise, Emma and Olivia Parker sat hunched over their father's stabilization system, not merely imitating his work, but truly understanding it for the first time. The gyroscopic response time could be reduced by milliseconds if we modified these feedback algorithms, Emma observed, manipulating a virtual model. Olivia nodded, her fingers racing across a specialized tablet. And if we pair that with the frequency modulation Dad noted in Journal 7? Rebecca watched from nearby, intervening only when necessary. In the 3 months since they'd begun formally studying the HASS system, the twins had progressed from comprehension to innovation at a pace that astonished even her. They're not just learning it, she later explained to Blackwood in his office. They're reimagining it. She displayed the twins' latest modifications on his wall screen. Here's the current HASS system response time in extreme wind conditions, and here's what happens with the twins' refinements. The simulation showed a dramatic improvement in stability during turbulence. Our engineers missed this? Blackwood asked, his tone somewhere between impressed and concerned. They were constrained by conventional approaches, Rebecca explained. The twins see the system from a completely different angle. They approach problems without preconceptions. Blackwood studied the data silently. Their father would be proud. There's more, Rebecca continued. They've developed a predictive response framework that anticipates environmental changes before they impact the aircraft. It could reduce critical incidents by up to 40% in rescue operations. That evening, Blackwood met with Susan at the small cafe where they had their monthly check-ins on the twins' progress. Rebecca showed me their modifications to the HASS system, he said after pleasantries were exchanged. They're extraordinary. Beyond refinements, they're true innovations. Susan nodded, having already heard the details from her excited granddaughters. I want to file additional patents, Blackwood continued. With the twins as named inventors, the royalties would go directly to their trust, completely separate from the original agreement. You're not required to do that, Susan observed. It's not about requirements, Blackwood replied. It's about recognition. Their work deserves proper attribution and protection. As they discussed the details, Susan realized how much had changed. What had begun as a complicated negotiation over James's legacy had evolved into genuine respect for the twins' own contributions. When she returned home, she found Emma and Olivia still awake, working on calculations at the kitchen table. Mr. Blackwood wants to patent your modifications, she told them. The twins exchanged one of their silent looks before Emma replied, That makes sense, but we want to add a condition. What condition? Susan asked. That the rescue applications come first, Olivia said firmly, before any military uses. Susan smiled, hearing James's voice in their words. His ethical concerns lived on through them, his technical brilliance and moral compass both inherited by his remarkable daughters. Happy birthday to you. The song echoed across the Westfield Airfield's private hangar as Emma and Olivia blew out 11 candles on their shared cake. Their classmates from the academy and foundation children clustered around, but the twins' eyes were fixed on the gleaming helicopter beyond the celebration area. Is that really our present? Emma whispered to Susan. Not the helicopter, Susan laughed. The chance to see your improvements in action. Blackwood approached with Dr. Chen, The HAS system has been modified with your enhancements. Today's test flight will put it through extreme scenarios similar to rescue conditions. You'll observe from the ground with your grandmother, Dr. Chen explained. I'll be aboard with our test pilots to monitor performance. As the helicopter lifted off, the twins clutched their monitoring tablets, watching real-time data stream from the aircraft's systems. When the pilots deliberately flew into turbulent conditions, the twins held their breath. The original system would have struggled here, Olivia murmured, pointing to oscillation patterns. The helicopter remained remarkably stable, compensating instantly for wind shear that would have challenged even experienced pilots. That's the predictive algorithm engaging, Emma noted with pride. Suddenly, a warning flashed on their screens. Unexpected crosswinds created conditions eerily similar to those described in their father's journals, the very conditions present during the ambush where he had saved Blackwood's life. The stabilization system responded perfectly, adjusting the helicopter's position with microsecond precision. When the aircraft landed, Blackwood's expression was solemn. "Your father continues to save lives," he said quietly. "Through you." The twins nodded, understanding the profound connection between past and present. Their innovations weren't just technical achievements. They were their father's legacy reborn, protecting others just as he would have wanted. Spring sunshine bathed the campus of Westfield Academy as crowds gathered for the dedication ceremony. A modern glass building stood gleaming against the blue sky, its architecture both elegant and purposeful. Above the entrance, newly installed letters spelled out Captain James Parker Engineering Center. Susan adjusted Emma and Olivia's matching navy blazers, her heart swelling with pride. At 13, the twins had grown taller, their childish features maturing, but they still moved in that synchronized way that made people do double takes. "Nervous?" she asked, noting Emma's fidgeting hands. "A little," Emma admitted. "It's a big crowd. Dad would be too," Olivia added softly. He never liked being the center of attention. The past 2 years had transformed their lives in ways Susan could never have imagined that day at the airfield. The Parker stabilization system, enhanced by the twins' innovations, had been adapted for civilian aircraft worldwide, significantly improving safety in extreme conditions. The foundation now supported 37 gifted children, creating a community of young innovators who approached the twins with something close to reverence. William Blackwood approached, his expression uncharacteristically emotional. "It's time." As they took their places on the stage, Susan marveled at how their initially adversarial relationship had evolved. Blackwood had proven true to his word, honoring both the letter and spirit of their agreement. The twins' education had flourished under Dr. Chen's guidance, while Susan maintained firm boundaries, ensuring they remained children, not just prodigies. "Today, we honor not just innovation, but character," Blackwood began his address to the assembled crowd. Captain James Parker was a brilliant engineer who understood that technology's true value lies in how it serves humanity. As he spoke about James's contributions, Susan noticed the twins sitting straighter, their expressions solemn yet proud. 2 years ago, I discovered that James's legacy lived on in his daughters. Blackwood continued, gesturing toward Emma and Olivia. Their remarkable minds have already improved upon their father's work, saving countless lives through enhanced aviation safety systems now deployed globally. He paused, seeming to gather himself. But James's most important legacy wasn't technological, it was ethical. He believed passionately that innovation should serve humanity's highest purposes, not its darkest impulses. Blackwood looked directly at the twins. "Emma and Olivia have taught me what their father tried to teach me years ago, that how we use our capabilities matters more than what those capabilities are. They've transformed not just their father's technology, but my understanding of responsibility." After the ceremony, as guests toured the new facility, the twins led a small group of foundation students through the innovation lab designed especially for young minds. "This is where we'll develop the next generation of humanitarian technologies," Emma explained, showing them workstations equipped with specialized tools. "Everything we create here has one primary rule," Olivia added. "It must help, never harm." Susan watched from the doorway, joined unexpectedly by Blackwood. I underestimated them, he admitted quietly. When we first met, I saw them as James's daughters, extensions of his brilliance. I never expected them to change how I think about technology's purpose. James would be pleased, Susan replied. He always said the best engineers question not just how something works, but whether it should. As the twins demonstrated a new project to their rapt audience, Susan recognized that the journey wasn't ending but evolving. The Parker legacy had grown beyond James's innovations or even his daughter's remarkable abilities. It had become a philosophy embodied in the next generation of young innovators, that brilliance carries responsibility, that technology should serve humanity's best interests, and that the true measure of innovation isn't what it can do, but what it should do. Later, as they walked home in the golden afternoon light, the twins discussed their next project with the characteristic mixture of technical precision and ethical consideration that made them truly their father's daughters. Dad would like how this turned out, wouldn't he? Emma asked, glancing back at the building bearing his name. Not just the building, Susan replied, putting an arm around each girl. Everything you've become. Olivia smiled up at her grandmother. It's not finished yet, there's still so much to do. That's the most important part of your father's legacy, Susan said, her heart full. Not just what he created, but what he inspired. And that will continue through you and through everyone you teach. As they reached their home, no longer a modest apartment but a place where dreams and innovations flourished, Susan knew that James's greatest wishes had been fulfilled. His daughters had indeed inherited his technical brilliance, but more importantly, they had embraced his commitment to using that brilliance responsibly. And that was a legacy that would transcend generations.